Membrane transport. There are two kinds of membrane transport. There is passive transport and there is active transport. Passive transport does not use ATP, whereas active transport uses ATP. That's the main difference between the two. So let's write it down here. Passive transport does not use ATP. Active transport uses ATP. Passive transport. Passive transport is mostly the movement of molecules down the gradient, which means they move from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So let's write that down the gradient. There are three kinds of passive transport: simple diffusion, facilitated diffusion, and osmosis. So let's take a look at simple diffusion. This is the movement of molecules down the concentration gradient. So you move from a region of high concentration and molecules move down to a region of low concentration. So now let's take a look at facilitated diffusion. It's very much like simple diffusion, but the only difference is that facilitated diffusion needs a protein channel, which means larger molecules will move through this. Polar molecules will move through this channel. In simple diffusion, the movement of molecules are usually very small. So here we have a protein channel for facilitated diffusion. Now let's move to osmosis. Osmosis is the movement of water from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration of water molecules. So water usually moves from a place where there are fewer solutes to a place where there are more solutes. They move from a region of high concentration of water to a region of low concentration. In other words, water moves towards the salt. Active transport. Active transport usually involves the movement of molecules up the gradient. We have two kinds of active transport: primary active transport and secondary active transport. In primary active transport, molecules move up the gradient from a region of low concentration to a region of high concentration. So let's write that down: up the gradient or against the gradient. So you have molecules moving, molecules such as sodium, potassium, calcium, moving from a region of low concentration to a region of high concentration. To do this, you need a protein pump. And this protein pump is powered by ATP. So now let's take a look at secondary active transport. Secondary active transport has two things happening within the same cell. You would have molecules moving down the concentration at one end and molecules moving up the concentration at another end. So here's a cell with the front end, and there's a channel in the front end and molecules moving down the gradient. There's a pump at the back end with molecules moving against the gradient. So there's the channel in the front end, and there is a pump at the back end. Secondary active transport occurs in the intestines and in the kidneys, where a lot of absorption of molecules takes place. So this allows molecules such as glucose, amino acids, and ions to enter a cell powered by the movement of sodium. So the cell has a front end and a back end. The front end of the cell has channel protein. The back end has a protein pump. The front end allows molecules such as allows sodium to move down the concentration gradient, while the back end moves sodium against the concentration gradient. So the back end has a pump, and the front end has a channel. The pump is powered by ATP. So the distribution of sodium is different outside and inside the cell. So that's what makes the sodium move in. There's a large amount of sodium outside the cell, and the concentration of sodium inside the cell is very low. So it's very easy for the sodium to move outside to inside in a sort of rush. Sodium rushes in a kind of whoosh energy. So this whoosh energy that we see with the sodium coming in, that energy is used, there's the whoosh energy coming in, with the sodium coming in, and that allows the movement of glucose to enter and catch a free ride with the sodium. Now this can continue, and when that happens, there's your free ride with sodium. The levels of sodium inside the cell can go up, and if that goes up, the concentration gradient between the outside and inside goes down, and if that happens, this whoosh will no longer occur. So in order to fix that, sodium needs to be pumped out of the cell, and that is why you have a pump at the back end. So the secondary active transport that happens in the front end of the cell is dependent on the primary active transport that occurs at the back end of the cell. So you're continuously pumping out sodium so that you will always maintain the gradient, the very high gradient of sodium from outside to inside the cell, and that makes the movement of glucose possible as well.